So I'm going to be talking about asking questions through making in emerging tech. So my name's Austin. I'm a prototyper, I'm a designer, and just a fun thing maker. And I've been working in AR, VR, and emerging tech, and basically in R&D labs for pretty much my entire career. So I've learned lots of tricks about how to make things. And what I think is really interesting about emerging tech, but also AR, VR, is that you often get a higher density of open questions about your product because there's a lot less that's figured out. But what a lot of people miss is that so you need to be asking the right questions, but you also need to be asking them in the right ways for emerging tech products to be successful. There's lots of ways to ask questions. You can just put something out in the market and see what the market says. You can do surveys, you can do UX research, you can go and pitch ideas in front of people and get feedback from them. But I think one of the most effective and tight feedback loops is to ask questions through the act of making, prototyping, and getting things out there. But before I dive into some examples of ways that teams I've worked on or projects I've made have worked in terms of asking questions, I'll take you through a quick overview of how I got into this space. So, first up, I did great in high school. I got a 2.4 GPA, 0.4 less, and I would not have passed. And this led me to the first important question of my budding career, which is, if I can't pick which university I really want to get into, which ones have the best weather? And so you see in this picture here, that's where I went to school. It was in Florida. It was on the water. It was amazing. But I did get my grades up a little bit in my undergrad, and I ended up transferring to another school. But the problem was that I was a double major in art and computer science. So I wasn't going to be able to graduate on time if I did both of those after I transferred. So I asked kind of not the greatest question, which is, would I rather make art all day or would I rather code all day? And of course I was like, oh, I want to be making art all day. That's awesome. But perhaps a better question might have been, which of these career paths will be most fulfilling for my life later? Or even, could I do both of these things in one? And that is what I ended up doing. So I made interactive sculptures, and I would go to e-waste recycling facilities, and they sell computer components by weight. So I would just buy these bins and build these horrible Frankenstein computers that were just barely good enough to run the programs to make my sculptures interactive. And I'd put on, shows inside of e-waste facilities and stuff like that. So that ended up getting me really interested in the field of human-computer interaction and set the course for my graduate studies, and then I was off to Silicon Valley ever since, and I've been in emerging tech ever since then. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is Parsable. So Parsable is a startup that I was a part of. When I first joined, it was called Wearable Intelligence. And in terms of making things to ask questions, the thing here is you've got to be asking those questions to the right people when you go to make something. The core question for this company was, can Google Glass empower hands-busy workers in blue-collar environments? So the core idea was, all right, if we have someone who's in construction or manufacturing, they're working with their hands, if we can deliver information up here and keep their hands free, what are the possibilities there? How could we up-level stuff? And so we asked this question by building prototypes on Google Glass and field testing them. And this was really important because it would have been really easy to go out to leaders of, construction, manufacturing, oil, gas, etc. companies and pitch them this glamorous vision of all of these amazing ideas we had for ways we could, up-level the work. But those people that we would be pitching to are actually too far away from the end users of that product, right? They're not the ones out in the field doing that work. And so we instead went out to the field, going out to oil rigs and construction sites and manufacturing facilities. I got a sweet pair of embroidered steel-toed cowboy boots out of the deal too, which I got made fun of for that on a construction site. And if I was wearing them now, you'd probably be making fun of me too. But what we found when we did that was that it would not empower these workers. And it wasn't because our ideas weren't good. It wasn't because the product notion of the core premise was bad. It actually came down to hardware limitations in those environments with Google Glass. So, when we'd have people put it out, if you're out working in the hot sun in the desert for 4 hours, it overheats. And if you have to travel 8 hours out to a job site, are you really going to be, and you forget your battery for your Google Glass, then it's going to die while you're out there. And so even though we had a bunch of really great ideas, because we went out and we tried to ask the question through making, we were able to identify it wasn't going to be a good fit. But since we did it this way, we exposed other opportunities that were out there, and we actually ended up pivoting the startup to address the notion of real-time procedural updates for when someone updates the way to do something, and you can receive that information in the field. We kind of binned the Google Glass side and moved into a more typical tech stack there. Next up is PaintSpace. So PaintSpace is an app that I independently designed, developed, and released sort of as a one-man band kind of project. And you can see it up there. It's basically sort of like Tilt Brush on your phone. It lets you paint in AR. And the interesting thing here about making was it's trying to figure out how can I be competitive. And there's a little bit of a backstory here that I'll share with you. So the question for this is, how can I create an AR launch day app that competes with larger players? So some context here is, at the time, I was doing R&D for Westfield Malls. And we were looking into how we could roll out digital storefronts over the real storefronts through the phone using what's called image marker tracking tech that basically looks for an image and then it pins digital content relative to it. But it was very inconsistent. It was pretty janky. It was hard to imagine how we were going to release it from a production perspective. And then Apple announced this thing called ARKit, and it was the early developer release. And I saw it, and it didn't use these trackers, and the tracking was so good, I actually did not believe that it was real. I was like, okay, they chose the perfect video for this. So I didn't have a phone that could run it, but I looked up Apple's return policy for phones, which was 30 days at the time. So I went out and I bought an iPhone with the intention of returning it in 30 days just so I could try it out. So I tried it out. It was that good, and I think it was 8 weeks until the launch of the functionality into the App Store. And I knew there was going to be tons of awesome AR apps emerging. I wanted to be in that space, but I knew that it was just going to be a one-man band side project, and there were going to be other big players. So I had to make a couple of important tactical decisions about how I was going to ask that competitive question. The first is that I can do engineering, but I'm not an engineering team. So I wasn't going to win on magnificent engineering goodness and blow people's minds with that. The other is that I was time constrained, right? And personnel constrained. So app ideas with tons of content, app ideas that would take a super long time to build, they weren't really going to be viable to create this launch day app. And so I basically went through my list of awesome ideas and I just crossed a bunch of them out and ended up falling on PaintSpace. And it went pretty well. The answer to how you could be competitive is through ruthlessly prioritizing, taking good ideas and saying, I don't have the capacity to answer this. And that's true of teams I've been on. You have to be really realistic about how you're going to be able to ask the questions. It was really successful. It was at the top of the app charts. Apple named it one of their best apps of 2017, and it would later go on to be a launch partner with Google AR Core, which is their version of ARKit. Speaking of that, talk a little bit about my time at Google. And this is really interesting work because this is, when you're making things to answer questions, it's not in a vacuum. And the more context that you're building the things that you make on, the more effective your lines of questioning will be. So I was leading some R&D efforts at Google Daydream that were around how can mobile AR create opportunities for existing products to provide more value. And the way we did this is we did a rodeo tour, right? We'd go and we'd spend 8 weeks with the Gmail team, 8 weeks with the calendar team, 8 weeks with the driverless car team, and we do these rapid prototyping iterations. What was really helpful is these products already had a lot of answers to the important questions. If you're Gmail, you know who your users are, you know what value you're providing to them. And so we were able to make a much more finely scoped question that we were trying to answer, which let us iterate quicker. And that's really important because in emerging tech spaces, you can basically expect that you're going to fail many more times than you succeed. And so the ability to build and ask those questions quickly is going to get you greater success more often. And this process works pretty well. Through that, this was the spark of the work for the Google AR walking navigation, and Google just announced its translation glasses, and though I don't work there anymore, I have it on good authority that it might still have the same code name from when we worked on it. So I can't promise it, but excellent. And now to Meta. So this is asking questions about the possibilities of the metaverse. And I can't get too deeply into the work here, but I can say we're looking at things around what opportunities AR provides for people to express themselves, people-facing AR. The simplest examples being, a selfie filter. But you can imagine, can we augment someone's voice? Can we track their body and do interesting things with that? And how does that help people express themselves? And we're building to investigate this. We're also looking at, this is my core work right now with my team. What do people want to do in the metaverse, and how can we ensure it's possible? So what you see behind me is from an announcement Zuck made last week, and we're basically trying to bite off this giant question. And the way that we're doing it is by creating a platform so that developers can help us answer it, because it's just so meaty and so big. So I'll leave you with a couple of things around some advice for asking questions in your own practice. The first is make sure you're asking the right question, but also make sure you're asking it in the right way. Not every way to ask a question is equal, and sometimes you won't need to build something, but I do bias towards building being the way to ask questions well for emerging tech products. The next is be tactical with what you make. I think something that's really common in emerging tech and in AR and VR is people get very idealistic, right? They let perfect be the enemy of good very often, and you really want to be able to get things out the door, and you have to make tough calls, and you're probably going to have a bunch of great ideas that you have to just put to the side for anything from time to personnel to what talents do you have on your team to be able to execute. And the last piece of advice, and this is maybe controversial, it's to build more and pitch less. And this is because, especially in this space, it's really easy for me to create a glamorous video that looks amazing, it blows your mind, wow, such a cool concept, I can't wait for the future to be here. And then we both agree it's awesome, but it can fall on its face. A way that I often like to say this is, let's say we've got an awesome diamond ring. We can both oh, it's so brilliant, it's so beautiful. But it's not until we can actually try on the ring to see if it fits to know if it's actually going to be good in practice. And that's what building gets you. You get to try them out. And more often than not, the cool ideas, they start to break down in practice, not in theory, for a variety of reasons. Cool, so that's it for me. You can hit me up on any of these avenues, and yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to start. I'll start at maybe at the beginning, because I guess you mentioned in your presentation that you didn't start from day one in a kind of academically advantaged position, and I guess you started slow and then recovered. And the only reason I bring that up is because I think Google in particular is notorious for only hiring the cream of the engineering crop and otherwise, not just engineering, but so something I'm wondering about how and then also not only did you just obviously there's lots of different roles at Google, not just emerging tech and AR. I'm just wondering how did I
parlay it?
Yeah, how did you get in?
Very maybe unsurprising from the talk, tactically, basically knowing that I would have to sort of ladder up
Yeah.
into it. I tried to create like a glide path where I could lean into my strengths and sort of be like really lean in that way. So yeah, basically it was a longer journey, but by trying to make sure that I wasn't engaging in projects which like I couldn't smash out of the park,
Yeah.
I was able to sort of like build a story that helped ladder up.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean taking no risks or anything like that, but I think like if you have the goal in mind, then it like behooves you to get really strategic about how you're approaching it, and that's sort of what I did.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, to some extent, I guess you followed your own advice, which is around building and doing, creating versus building the perfect pitch, I suppose, to some extent, right? So, okay, I mean, I'm not sure how much you can talk about Meta, but maybe you can talk a bit more about Google. And what I'm just curious about is, again, I mean, this emerging technology space, as we all know, is very difficult. And in terms of, it's been both extremely exciting because you can see the potential of all these different things that you're working on, at least in your mind's eye, if you will, and then you're faced with I guess ultimately, how are decisions made about? I mean, you've talked about how you advise things, but I guess how are they actually made in terms of saying there are a billion things we can do, but we can do 3 or 5 or whatever. Is there a process that you can describe with regard to how those decisions are made?
Yeah. So usually there are a million ideas, and you try to find like some razors to cut some of those ideas out, right? Like maybe it could be product goals, maybe it's like other things, and you get it down to some reasonable clump. And then what we usually try to do is start with like really low fidelity stuff like storyboards, and we'll start to put them in front of people, shop them around to sort of see where the heat is going on really low cost methods for like lots of ideas. And then we'll take those top ones, and typically from there you'll build like a quick prototype. It could even be like kind of faked, and we'll start user testing them. And then we basically take the winners that are performing well, that match with the product goals, that have been winnowed down from like the broader list. And that's like a very repeatable process. I do it in almost every project.
Okay. So last thing before we need to move on is, I guess, looking more at the market. I mean, we had a presentation from Sam Kingston before about her experience working in your space. And it's really to some extent the same question, which is that, as you know, that AR, VR has been something that's obviously been discussed, and obviously Facebook have made a tremendous investment in this space. I mean, from your view, is it ultimately going to be that once we have a piece of technology that allows, in terms of the hardware, that allows wider adoption, is that ultimately still the big thing that prevents the
Yeah, this is just me speaking for me, by the way. I'm not spokespersoning it at all, but I think that the hardware, you can see it starting to converge with like VR pass-through that kind of resembles AR for use cases. And then, with AR glasses, I think once the form factor gets there, then it's pretty, like the value proposition is pretty high. It's just like a high barrier to entry right now, but yeah, I do think that when the form factor exists, sweet pair of glasses, you don't even know, and then it does magical things for you, that it's going to be like a big deal.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously with the early presentation, I think the content proposition you have once you have the stuff on is very high. The problem is the convenience or the inconvenience factor of having the stuff on, if you will, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess there have been things like Magic Leap that, obviously people held out some hope that there was going to be a magical leap, which seems like it's not going to happen. Is there anything else on the horizon that you think, oh, well, these guys might actually, or gals, might be doing something to help this?
Yes, but I don't think I can talk about any of it.
Okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, I would look to VR pass-through, because I think that enables a lot of use cases in the home for AR. And there's also some like kind of cool, smaller AR type products in the market that are doing cool stuff with, I'm trying to remember the name of this. It's like well, I probably shouldn't talk about it too much because I can't remember the name, but it's like a co-located table gaming experience. And if you have the headset on with someone, you can like, play Dungeons and Dragons on your table with them and stuff. And it looks pretty sweet.
Cool. Austin, thank you so much.
Awesome. Cheers. Thank you guys.